morning, everyone. It's Ben Buckner and Dan Bosse coming at you Monday, October 27th. Risk is on this morning. There is a lot to digest, so we thought we would just kind of discuss what we're seeing this morning. And of course, the highlights are it seems like a framework has been set up for Trump and Xi to meet, maybe hammer out some details this week, and also kind of a flood of action all over Asia. We have got frameworks for PACs, at least, with Thailand and Vietnam, working with Malaysia and Cambodia as well, kind of sorting out rare earth mineral trade globally. But Dan, what do you think? What can we kind of sink our teeth into this morning? Markets, of course, sharply higher, but what is next?
Yeah, Ben. So as we go into the modified session here, corn's up about 7, beans are up about 23, the wheat market up 14. So, it's been a really nice push to the upside, and we've got a lot of what I call hopeism in the market. There's been a lot of course, expectations built in the price relative to the United States and China. First thing I tell everyone is that these are not binding agreements that the Chinese are looking at. So already there's discussion this morning. You saw President Trump talking on Air Force One as he was heading towards Japan that maybe the deals are changing a little bit. People were asking for details. And he said, well, I really don't want to offer them because there's still some, we don't know exactly what's going to be presented to, of course, himself and Xi in terms of the frame contract. The other thing I would mention to you is there is no sign of any Chinese interest in any of the cash markets. In talking to some of the cash-connected people, whether it's Kafka or Sino, nobody's showing any interest in U.S. soybeans here this morning. So I'm pretty confident that the Chinese should, if they were to be doing any deals, would want to get ahead of everything, and they're not getting ahead of everything. China doesn't like chasing markets like this. So if there is a deal in which maybe the only thing I can think that the Chinese would get would be a reduction in fentanyl tariffs, maybe to zero. That would cause them to reduce their soybean tariffs or grain tariffs, which are 34%, similarly. And maybe we could get back to where we were, Ben, where we're kind of like, able to trade kind of like back in March, where there's not a lot of tariffs and the Chinese can make a selection. But I don't think it's going to lead to a big onslaught here of Chinese demand. One of the market's problems, though, is that the USDA being closed, it does not allow us to see daily sales. So, we're all kind of flying in the dark a little bit. This is why I lean on my cash connections and try to say, hey, are you doing anything? Last week, we didn't see anything. This week, I don't think, at least this morning, we're not seeing anything. And the Chinese people that I'm talking to are saying, hey, we're not even hearing any soybeans. So in the Chinese media, there's no talk about China buying U.S. soybeans. So, this is all promoted in the U.S. media, or let's say the popular media. Besant coming out yesterday, Greer doing a little bit of piling on, but on a very tentative manner. And then President Trump not providing much one way or the other. So a lot of uncertainty. I do believe that there was progress made on the weekend. However, what it means to the market, we need to see cash demand. My head is still something around. We're going to pour it a high this week. Farmers need to reward that high, whether it comes today or whether it comes Wednesday night. That's, of course, Thursday in Malaysia is unknown. But again, I'm doubtful the Chinese are going to chase this market. And if you think about export projections, USDA is way too high. If you think about China not buying any U.S. soybeans, you can get down to about 1250. We're kind of in the middle of the road at 1.43 billion bushels today. That assumes about 8.5 to 9.5 million metric tons of Chinese import demand this crop year. That means that China has to buy something in this December, February timeframe. Remembering that if you're an exporter selling to China, it takes about 6 weeks to get vessels all worked out, to get documentation, to get soybeans in place. We're now talking about shipping in the middle of December. That would, of course, probably continue to the end of January, maybe the middle of February, but it's a narrow 8-week window, Ben. I don't know if you have any thoughts, but let's kind of kick this back and forth. But that's my read on things here this morning.
Yeah, I think so. It makes sense that the market's up. I mean, that was unavoidable. But we've seen frameworks for deals several times in the last 10 months, really, since this whole thing kicked off. So yeah, it's just hard for us to say this morning. I think that China's going to buy soybeans this week. I do think that if you do have the tariffs eliminated that exist now, the fentanyl tariff and the 34% tariffs on China, you go back to normal. It's been kind of the verbiage used. U.S. soybeans do have a bit of a discount to South American for December and January delivery, so that makes sense. If China needs beans, they buy them from the U.S. And then on paper, at least, the Brazilian market's $10 a ton below the U.S. starting kind of the first day of February. So if we do assume normalcy, I guess they go back to Brazil then. So you still have this window that's not terribly long at this point.
Well, I think you're right, and it's a narrow window, and maybe there's a little bit of activity later in the year. Bassett also talked about this for years, that U.S. soybean farmers should be happy for years. Yeah, I think that would be a nice statement, but again, we're not entering in a phase one type of agreement here, in which both sides are binding themselves. Even on the phase one agreement, we learned that they didn't fulfill it, and so that binding, if you will, wasn't there. So again, these are a lot of what I call handshake promises. We'll do this if you do that, and we'll do this. But as we've seen in rare earth minerals, they kind of come and go, these promises. They're the memory of these handshakes are very short. And then we get back to what I believe is happening, which is a kind of a managed decoupling economically and politically between the United States and China. I think that's the pathway we're on longer term. Though, again, how it looks day to day is questionable. Today, we're all built up and euphoric about, Mao Man, I've had several people call me, we got another phase one type of agreement here. Here we go. Boy, I'd like to agree with that for American agriculture, but I just don't believe that the Chinese will lock themselves down in terms of being specific to one supplier they don't trust, which is the USA. And we are, of course, the supplier to them that we don't trust them, which is China. So mistrust, particularly going all the way back to the phase one agreement when China didn't fulfill it and we didn't ask China to fulfill it, really leaves you where you are today, which is a diversified supply network, and they buy the lowest price. And so if we're the lowest price today, maybe there's going to be some demand, but I'm not expecting it to be big. And I don't think it changes the complexion of the markets totally, especially looking soybeans being on this rally and getting closer and closer to $11 relative to March futures. I believe if I was a Brazilian farmer, I'd be wanting to sell a lot of soybeans at that price. And I do think we'll be seeing fairly good movement from the Brazilians as we go through the week.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, we've kind of made some moves the last week. And again, this rally makes complete sense thinking about geopolitics, but you got to do something, I think. I guess too, at Ag Resource, we're kind of, top down. So start at the very top, global supply and demand. I don't think that the reshuffling of trade flows really changes that bottom number, the end stocks and stocks to use. So again, like we've kind of highlighted over and over again, we're still looking at South American weather. That is not going to be a focus today, but it does look pretty good. It rained a lot in Argentina the last several days. It's going to rain a lot in Brazil this week. I think the monsoon's kicking off. And so thinking about this too, and we'll revisit and debate South American yields December and January. But what we do know is that the Argentine corn crop's going in the ground very fast. That crop will be available in March. Mato Grosso's planted 60% of their soybeans as of Friday. And so just basic arithmetic, they're going to be harvesting, Jan 20th, Jan 25th. There's going to be pretty sizable tonnage out of Mato Grosso available. So, just having to contend with that. There's going to be a lot of physical supply still. I think there's a lot of physical supplies today. So, be careful. I think chasing this thing higher.
No, man, I really believe you got to be using these advancements like this for sales, and whether that top comes in today or maybe, like I said, Wednesday, Thursday when Trump meets for Z, I'm not sure, but this should be a week that you reward the market. And I think we'll leave clients with that thought in terms of what's happening. If they want to get specifics, they can come into our newsletter. We can surely give them that on a 1 month trial. But as I see it here today, I really believe that this is a week that you make some sales. Again, remembering these are not binding agreements. All of these agreements in Malaysia are, of course, I hate to use the word handshake, but they are verbal agreements that the president then uses tariffs to enforce them, which makes that November court hearing on tariffs all the more important, because if you don't have an enforcement mechanism, none of the paper, none of the handshakes that you have are worth their weight in anything. So that's kind of where we find ourselves here this morning. Any closing comments, Ben?
I don't think so. Stay tuned. We'll kind of leave it there for now, but this is going to be very fluid. So check out the newsletter. We'll probably have updates every 3 hours, and we'll see if anything changes tomorrow, and we'll talk to you then. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.